All right, everyone. So hello, thank you so much for joining. My name is Jesse Wieland. I'm the Associate Director at ONF. And so we're literally right behind that study space, right across the way. So if you haven't been to our office before, obviously we're very excited to start working with you. We also have...
Yeah, I'm Bonnie Garcia-Glockner. I'm the Assistant Director of ONF.
Keith, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I am Keith McCall. I'm the Assistant Director of the Office of Graduate Fellowships and Awards, almost right above you right now.
Yeah. So obviously all of you are here too. And so this is going to be a presentation on all of the different types of Fulbright awards. And so Fulbright is one of the most malleable opportunities that we work with because students use it to, so they believe it's over 140 different countries. Different countries are going to have different quantities of Fulbrights, different types of Fulbrights, but we're going to get into the general types. And so we're going to have your English teaching assistantships, your academic, your research opportunities, or your creative art Fulbright. Disclaimer, you can only apply for one. So if you're undecided right now, that's absolutely fine. And that's the benefit of meeting with one of us is we can help narrow down your choices to the best opportunity for you. But to kind of get into, well, let's see if I can get this to, there we go. So we're going to be going over all of those different types of Fulbrights and every, well, aspect of the application. It is a rather dense application, which is why we're talking in spring for an award that's due at the end of August, because it does take a few months to put all of these components together. We're going to go over what makes a competitive application at the national level. We're going to talk a little bit about our office's answer questions at the end. And I promise you, I'm not going to bore you with the history of the award. I'm not going to sit here and read this to you, but the reason it's here is because the reason that, so Fulbright was founded to be an opportunity to foster mutual peace and understanding between the United States and other countries. That mission still remains the same. So regardless of the Fulbright award that you're applying to or the country that you're applying to, we want to find as many ways as possible to ensure that you are fostering that mutual peace and understanding, that you're engaging with the people and the communities either through your research or through your academic project or with the English teaching assistantship with your partner teacher, that you're bringing American culture as you define it into the classroom or using methods that you think best represent American culture, or you're finding other ways through a supplemental project, which I'll describe in just a little bit, to engage with the country and the people. So Fulbright is a fully funded program. They're going to pay for your airfare, they're going to pay for your cost of living, they're going to find you a place to stay. So that can be either a homestay or an apartment. It just kind of depends on where you're applying. And they're going to cover your insurance as well. And so the eligibility is pretty straightforward. You do need to be a US citizen. You need to have your bachelor's degree before you start. So for those of you who are rising seniors, even if you're graduating in the summer, that's absolutely fine because most Fulbrights don't start until August. But if you're in your senior year, you're about to graduate, that's fine. We still work with alumni as well. Or if you're a graduate student. That's where if you're in a master's degree, you can apply at the end of your first year. If you're in your PhD, usually most people will apply before they really get into like the thick of their dissertation. But regardless, you need your bachelor's degree. The foreign language proficiency, there are many countries that do not require any foreign language proficiency. As long as you are fluent in English, that is more than enough. But for a lot of countries, it'll vary between beginner to advanced proficiency. Some countries it'll be recommended, others it will be required. But something to keep in mind is, say if you're applying to Colombia and it requires intermediate proficiency in Spanish, say you're applying for an academic award that really necessitates advanced proficiency, like I'm conducting interviews, I need to code those interviews, whatever that may be, you're going to need to show in your application that either you have that advanced proficiency or you have the translation support or the academics that will help you. And again, we can get into all of that a little bit later. And then the good help, that's something we can talk about in a one-on-one meeting. Some of these Fulbright placements can be very remote, depending on your project and your idea. And so Fulbright wants to know that they have the resources to support you or they can make those accommodations when possible. So something we can talk about in a one-on-one. Already kind of talked about all this, but Fulbright is going to cover everything. And if you're a creative art project, you need very specific supplies. Again, that's something that we can talk about in a one-on-one meeting just to make sure. think earlier I said 140, but it's around 160. The Fulbright Awards vary anywhere from 8 to, I believe, 13 months. It's actually the longest one for an ETA in South Korea. And so the reason that time frame is important, specifically for the academic awards or the art awards, is that you were not just building a case for the feasibility of your project and idea. We need to make sure that your project can be completed in 8 months. And so you're going to probably hear me throughout this presentation use the word feasibility. And that case is made in many, many different ways throughout your application. But that's the, if you're taking notes or you write down one word from this presentation, forget everything else, that's fine. Just remember feasibility. Now, the academic grants, those kind of exist on a spectrum, and it varies depending on the country that you're applying to. And so an academic Fulbright can be on one end of that spectrum. It can be a graduate degree. Say I'm wanting to pursue a 1-year master's degree or the first year of a multi-year master's or PhD. Fulbright will fund that year. Now, on the other side of that spectrum, a Fulbright academic grant can be purely research. I'm not earning a degree. I'm just traveling abroad to complete my project in that 8 to 12 months. Usually that will be affiliated with an academic institution, and we can talk about the affiliation letter a little bit later, but otherwise the award will exist somewhere in the middle where students can go and pursue a master's degree, a 1-year master's. And if research is a component of that program, then that's what you're doing to complete your Fulbright. Does that make sense? And so at the end of this presentation, if you'd like to hang out, I can pull up the website and go through it with you for those of you who haven't been able to explore it yet. But there is a very specific section that will vary in as few words as possible. It'll say academic awards, and then it'll say open study research, yes or no. And then graduate degree enrollment, and then yes or no. And so if it's yes to both, then you can exist within that entire spectrum for the award that you choose in that country, or depending on what is yes and what is no, you have to mold your project, your idea to fit that accommodation. Does that make sense? Now, the English teaching assistantships, they also exist on a spectrum. And so for a few countries, I'll use South Korea as an example, they have a priority for the education that occurs in the classroom. So anywhere between about, I want to say 30 to 40 hours a week, you are in the classroom working with your students. That's what they're looking for. On the other end of that, there's some countries that have as little as 12 hours a week. You'll be in the classroom working with your students. And then for the 30 other hours that week, you're engaged in some sort of supplemental project in addition to your like teacher planning classes and the like. But that supplemental project is in many cases completely up to you. And so that's where applicants will take their other skills, their talents, things that they're interested in about the place, the culture, and articulate what they plan to do to complement what they're doing in the classroom. So for example, students in the past have talked about after school programs, not just for their students, but for the student's family, to create greater access to English education or other cultural engagement opportunities. Students have talked about very specific volunteer work or service work or organizations within that country that align with their other academic interests that they want to get involved in. And so make sure that, and again, when I bring up the website, I can show you all of this, but you want to make sure if you're between a few countries right now, or a few different regions on where you could apply, and you really want that type of cultural engagement during your Fulbright opportunity, maybe you want to make sure that that opportunity has a supplemental project, either required or optional. Does that make sense? Cool. And so this is just to kind of quickly go through and highlight a few students that have received Fulbrights through our office, but a little bit of background into why they selected the locations that they selected. And so Brian's, if you attended the presentation yesterday, we read Brian's essays. So I'm not to single you out, but thank you for attending that presentation. And so Brian, throughout the time that, because I knew him when I was a graduate student at Florida State, he was heavily involved in the Center for Leadership and Social Change, heavily involved in service in Tallahassee, very passionate about education, specifically he worked at a bunch of summer camps. He worked with students with disabilities, students whose first language was not English. So just had a very diverse interest. And was really passionate about educational policy and making sure that education was accessible for marginalized groups. And so his senior year, we worked on a different fellowship actually, because he actually applied to Fulbright once and was just hard rejection, just did not make it past the first round, but he was accepted to the Florida Gubernatorial Fellows Program, and that's located in Tallahassee. It's a year-long internship to work with state government. And he was placed with the Department of Children and Families. And it was during that gap year experience where he really started to flesh out his passions for educational policy and access. And so during that time, he reapplied for Fulbright. And he was between a few different countries, but ultimately he settled on Kenya because when he was doing his research into their educational system, he noticed how crucial to advance through that system, you needed proficiency in English. And so based on his own lived experiences from his childhood of navigating or being the translator for his family, based on his studies, based on his future goals of wanting to earn his master's degree in higher education, ultimately working for the Department of Education, I could go on, but he found a very specific reason on how he would be most effective in Kenya and working with his students. And in his application, he talks about all of his pedagogical ideas, how he's going to engage. And then in his personal statement, explored how Fulbright is going to get him to where he wants to be in his career. And so it's not just about like, I want to be in the classroom and play games with my students. You can make these ETA opportunities just like so specific to the country that you're applying to. And it's not just about how am I going to be effective here, but it's how is this opportunity, learning about this country, this culture, all of this going to help me as well. And so it's like, so that goes back to Fulbright's mission of that mutual peace and understanding. Does that all kind of make sense? Eli, actually, so Brian applied for the English teaching assistantship. Eli applied for the academic grant, but one that was purely research, so it didn't have a master's degree attached to it. And so let me back up a minute, because a lot of students, because I know most of the people here are undergraduates. I know the academic awards can sometimes be a little intimidating because you'll see when you're looking through the website, it can be for bachelor's, master's, and doctoral candidates. And so you're competing as a collective pool. So even though he was a bachelor's level candidate, he was competing against people that were much further along in their research. And so I say that because Fulbright will evaluate your application based on where you are. So it's not just like, okay, doctoral level candidates are inherently better. That's not what this is about. But students at FSU, at least in my experience, have used the Center for Undergraduate Research, have used idea grant opportunities or their Europe projects or other things that they've been doing on campus. And Fulbright could be a means to expand or to take that project even further. And so I have a few examples that in a one-on-one meeting I would love to tell you about, but for right now, Eli, his idea grant project was focused on coral reef restoration. And so he was traveling about, like 45 minutes south of Tallahassee. He was working with a project where they were using 3D modeling to create I am not a scientist, so I'm not going to fumble my way through trying to describe it. He was making really neat models and then putting them in the water, and that helped the fish and the corals. That's my simple way of describing it. But he was looking at the Philippines because, if you're talking about coral reef restoration, I think there are a few places in the world where you can look at, okay, well, how much coastline do they have? What's their access to all these different ecosystems? And they had been doing research for decades on this specific subject. And so he originally had his idea for this is what we had been doing. And so when he was reaching out to research institutions in the Philippines, it was like, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm trying to find someone to work with, and eventually heard back from this institution that was like, hey, we love the work that you're doing. We actually have this other project that's already going on, and maybe we can meet somewhere in the middle, but we would love to have you join our project, and this would kind of be your responsibility. And so I say that because the research projects don't always have to be just a novel idea that you created. It can start with something that you've been doing at FSU, and then by working with your potential affiliates in country or the academics that you can find, they can help meet you somewhere in the middle to let you know that, hey, this is what we have available. This is what, and so his project ended up adapting slightly, but was still the essence of what he wanted to do. Unfortunately, COVID interrupted his plans, but and I actually need to catch up with him, so this is a good reminder, but he had the option to now start his Fulbright that he actually received a few years ago. But what I really like about Eli's story is, and this is something that I emphasize to all of my students, is that we're going to be working on a Fulbright application over the next few months. but it's not a be all end all of Fulbright, because even though his Fulbright got delayed because of the pandemic, he was actually able to go back to Honduras, I believe, where he had been doing research based on other connections that he had. So he was still able to continue his work. And so we don't want you to put all of your eggs into one Fulbright basket. Of course, we want you to receive your Fulbright. But while we're working on that, and even after that concludes, it's what else are you doing? Are you applying to grad school? Are you applying to other gap year opportunities? Are you applying to internships? What does that look like? Because our Fulbright process is due so early that you're going to be done with your application essentially by the end of August. And hopefully a lot of the personal statements, the goals that you set, all of that material can be repurposed into other applications that you're going to be applying to, maybe other fellowships, but maybe graduate school, maybe other jobs throughout the fall and spring. So hopefully by the end of your senior year, you have options in front of you, if that makes sense. Any questions so far? I know I've been blabbing a lot, but I will continue doing that. But any questions about that so far before we get into the specifics? Yeah.
So will language proficiency affect an application? Let's say I'm applying to like Columbia again. So would an applicant who has an intermediate knowledge of Spanish have less of a chance of getting it than someone who is fluent?
That's a good question. As long as you meet that minimum proficiency, that's what matters. And for some students, so say they are applying fall of their senior year, and maybe they're at a beginner level, but say fall and spring of their senior year, they're taking further Spanish courses, and they will have that proficiency by the time that they would, in theory, start a Fulbright. You're still eligible to apply. You just need to show that you're going to continue that study. But no, higher proficiency does not inherently mean better, like, Fulbright. It all goes back to your ideas for the classroom, your ideas for the cultural engagement, your reasons for why you're applying it. So just meet that threshold, and then we can talk about the rest. But that's a good question. Any other thoughts before we go on? Cool. So like I was saying earlier, this is one of the more arduous applications that we work with because there are so many components that you need to submit. But that's why Keith and Bonnie and myself are here. We help you through every step of that process. Obviously, the online application is, well, duh, I know I need to submit that. But the reason that's on there is because it's an extremely deconstructed version of your resume. It's going to ask you for all of your work experience. It's going to ask you for any awards and honors that you've received and your extracurricular experience. And it just takes time to really fill all of that out. But also, there are 3 short responses in that application that I think are between like 8 to 1,200 characters, but it's essentially a solid paragraph. And one is, why are you doing this? Essentially, why are you applying to this opportunity? You have another that talks about your cultural engagement, like what are you doing to engage with the culture and the people? And the third is, where are you going after Fulbright? And so we want to and so I always recommend saving those to the very end because some of those topics will be touched on in your essays. And so I think if we can develop your statement of grand purpose, we can develop your personal statement, then we can circle back to the short response to either add more nuance to the overall picture of your application, or maybe be able to further expand on the ideas that you already have in your essays, if that makes sense. Now, the statement of grand purpose, it's 1 page if you're applying for an ETA. Otherwise, it's 2 pages for everyone else. And so the statement of grand purpose or the ETA, I think often how you begin your essay is by really establishing why you're applying to the place that you're applying to. There are many right ways to do that. From there, for the statement of grand purpose for the academic awards, it's getting into the program. Like if you're applying for a master's degree, it's okay, so this is the opportunity that I'm applying for. This is the curriculum, this is the coursework, this is like my thesis project, whatever it is. We're going to dig into it as deeply as we can. If it's a creative art project, it's like, okay, well, what is the project? What is your medium? Like who are you, and so on and so forth. For the ETA, it's getting into, like I was saying earlier, your pedagogical methods. What are you doing in the classroom and why are you doing it? We're not just like, obviously you're teaching English, but how are you going to go beyond that to maybe teach your students about X, Y, or Z? Or I've had students that have, based on their own lived experiences, they've talked about very similar cultural elements between what they know and what they hope to engage with in the country that they're applying to. And they use that as a way to just get their students interested in the language. Other students have found through their research that STEM education is a priority in that country and use their background in STEM as a way to, again, but so what I'm saying is identify what you think will make English language learning fun. And then if there is a supplemental project, we need to also explore that in the essay. So when we get to your personal statement, which is again 1 page, but it's not a full page to really talk about yourself. You maybe have about half a page, maybe 3/4, to give me a personal anecdote, give me something relevant about yourself or about your experience. And then we need to connect it back to, okay, so why Fulbright? Okay, so how is this opportunity moving you forward? Okay, so what? Why did you tell me that story? Does that make sense? Now, the language valuation, again, varies by country, in a beginner, intermediate, advanced, they're that spectrum. But like I was saying, for projects that inherently require advanced proficiency, you need to have it or you need to show where you're going to get it. The letters of recommendation, if you're applying to an academic award, it is a traditional letter of recommendation. Faculty tend to hold a little bit more weight. And so I would say at least 2 of those, try to aim for those to be from faculty. If all 3 are, great, but if not, maybe have that third be someone who can maybe speak to your character or your ability to engage across culture or to be whatever is relevant for your project. For the ETAs, it's a reference, and so they'll be sent a link to a form where they have about 5 questions that they need to answer, and that's going to get into, again, your ability to be a leader, to be a mentor, to engage across very logical questions to the opportunity that you're applying for. Now, oftentimes, I would say maybe 9 times out of 10 from my own experience, so if you're applying to an ETA, this doesn't apply to you. But if you're applying to an academic award, this letter of affiliation is oftentimes the hardest element for students to acquire. And that's because it requires relationship building. And that's why we're having this conversation with you now in April for an award that's not due until August. And so usually the requirement is 1 letter of affiliation, most likely from an academic institution. And so as long as you meet that minimum requirement, you're fine. Now, if you're applying to an academic award in the United Kingdom, these are not required, but it's something you could still submit. You can also submit up to 3 of them for your application because it all goes back to feasibility, like I said in the beginning. And so for some projects, 3 is not always better, but I worked with a student, I think at this point, it was 2 years ago, but time is, since the pandemic, time is just kind of like doing this, so who knows at this point, but I was working with a student that was applying for an art project in Germany, and long story short, it was about this this building that was being like refurbished to provide housing for immigrant communities, space for artists, and space for shops and stores. So really trying to build this space into a community that could be serviced by a lot of different groups. And so his requirement for academic awards in Germany was that you have an academic affiliation. And so he found a nearby university and had a professor there that was like, yeah, would love to help you with this. It was a film project that they were doing. They also reached out to the literal owners of this space that were like, yeah, absolutely, we'd love for you to do this. And then reached out to it was an organization that was run by the artists that were also affiliated with the refurbishing and making the space available. And they were like, yeah, we'd love to work with you. So holistically, it's like you have the academic support, you have the literal owners of the space, and you have like the artists, and they're all willing to work with you. So that means your project is very likely to be completed. And I believe it was like the 10 months, that you had. So whatever your project looks like, we can talk about what the letters look like. But anyways, moving on from there, transcripts, and obviously you're going to need your passport. But if you don't have that, you can go to the stadium. International programs will actually work with you to get that done.
Jesse, we have a question.
Yes.
I am interested in the Fulbright National Geographic Storytelling Fellowship to create a documentary on disability history. Do you have any advice for anyone interested in that portion of the application? I'm also a junior at FSU thinking of doing the Pathways program and in law school. Do you have any advice to someone in their shoes?
Absolutely. So there is a specific caveat on Fulbright's website for the National Geographic Partnership Award. My advice is, take this with a grain of salt, this is coming from me, but my recommendation is usually if you're focusing on a film project, you can do a film project without necessarily associating with the Nat Geo Award. It is the most competitive Fulbright that they have. And so obviously I don't know this student's background, but if you have like examples of your filmmaking, of the documentaries that you've made, or maybe other pieces of your work, then absolutely we should talk about it. But usually based on their history of selection, it appears that it's usually people that are that are pretty far along, I should say, in their profession. And so yes, we can talk about that opportunity and see if it's a good fit for you. But you can still, like the student that I just described initially was talking about a Nat Geo project, but then I very rarely, if ever, recommend looking at statistics. So I always caution saying this. They do exist. I will not tell you where to find them because I don't want that to influence your decision. But this student had such a good project that I just didn't want it to get bogged down by the Nat Geo competition. And the student ended up being a semifinalist, even though they ultimately weren't selected. So that's a long-winded way of saying, let's look at your experiences, let's look at your resume, and we can look at the Nat Geo opportunity if it's appropriate, but we can still do a film project regardless.
We have a couple other questions. Do you want
Yes.
to take them now?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. For the letter of affiliation, do you need a letter from your home institution where you're getting your degree from, as well as a letter from the university you're interested in working with abroad?
Good question. So the affiliation letter is all in country to where you're applying. And so the letters of support from your home institution, that would likely just be your letter of recommendation. But the affiliation letter is somebody saying they will support you in the country that you're applying to.
And then for study/research grants, do all 3 letters of recommendation typically come from faculty at FSU, or would it be beneficial to have a letter from someone outside the university?
I think it just really depends on your project. If they all came from FSU, that's fine. If they came from other people you've maybe worked with through other opportunities or internship or research experiences, that's absolutely fine too. I think it all goes back to feasibility, not to be redundant, but if say this faculty member at Florida State can really speak to my research ability or the performance I did in their class, but say this other individual can speak to my, another project that I did or my ability as an artist, and like there's value in diversifying your letters, if that makes sense. Because I also like you don't want to submit the same letter 3 times. But like they're a great student, they can do research. They're a great student, they can do research. So have a conversation with your recommenders and be like, hey, this specific thing that we did together, or you see me in this capacity, can you speak to that? And we can start to change some of the language being used in your letter. So you're hopefully the review committee is going to see a holistic version of you as best they can on paper. If that makes sense. Yes.
So I have like a more, I don't have a question about the application specifically, but I have a more broad application about Fulbright as a whole. Should I save that question for later or ask it now?
Let's wait. Okay, let's wait. And we'll get back to the rest of the questions in the chat in just a second. I want to get through these last little bits. And so when you submit your application, it's going to be going through both a domestic review committee, and if you make it past that round, then it's sent to the host country for review and final selection. So this is in regard to, well, I mean, yes, overall, but really that domestic review. And so like I said at the very beginning, it's that commitment to the Fulbright mission, whether you're applying to an ETA or an academic award, they want to see in as many ways as possible, as many appropriate ways as possible, that engagement across culture. So this sometimes trips students up. So I think so if you are like currently residing in the United Kingdom and you have been for like more than 3 months and you're applying to a Fulbright to extend that stay, that's where we're getting maybe a little bit into that too much in-country experience. I have students that like say, I lived the first 5 years of my life in Brazil, and now as an adult, I am applying to go back to Brazil. Like that's fine, like that's okay. Sometimes dual citizenship can opt you out of applying to a specific country, but not always. Mexico, for example, like dual citizenship is fine. There's also another that I will in this moment not remember where that is okay. But that's a talk to your advisor and we will let you know. I've already kind of talked about language proficiency. I won't touch on that. If I can, in your application, if I can control F and just find every time you use the country's name and I replace it with another country and it's the same project, that is not a good Fulbright application. And so we need to make sure, again, in as many ways as possible, that it is not just sometimes unique to the country, sometimes it's very unique to the city within that country that you're applying to. It's very unique to the university that you're applying to. Like if you're applying to the UK, they have on their website about 40 to 50 partnership awards with different universities. So if you know, like I'm pursuing a master's in urban and regional planning. It's like, okay, so why do you need to do that at the University of Leeds more than you need to do that at, you know, the London School of who knows what? If you couldn't tell, I really like this word. You need a feasible project. You need to make sure that it is going to be completed in the time that you have. And I know you can't really see this, but within your essays, we want them to be authentic, we want them to be relevant, and we want them to be compelling. To kind of breeze through this, so this is our general timeline. This June 1st deadline, that is for first drafts of your essays. They don't need to be good, they just need to be first drafts. And that's because if really from June until that August submission, we're going to be meeting weekly to work on your essays. But also we made that intentionally a little bit earlier this cycle because Bonnie and I and Keith and all of you need a break. At some moment during the summer, I will be taking a couple of weeks off and you will not hear from me. It's not because I don't love you, but I just need a break. And so we want to make sure that we're working through this process in an appropriate manner so we don't get burnout because we know that it's very rigorous. Now, if you're applying for an ETA, that's going to be August 24th. If you're applying for an academic, that's going to be August 25th. And that is for a full and complete application, like done. Unless there are extenuating circumstances can communicate with that, but that it's a finished application because we schedule an interview for mid-September with faculty from Florida State, department heads from departments where we get a lot of applicants, former Fulbrighters, people that are going to review your materials, interview you, and give you feedback. And if you're giving them an incomplete application, it's going to hinder their ability to do that. And so you get that feedback, and you have usually about 1 to 2 weeks to implement it, and then resubmit by, again, this is our deadline, which is the beginning of October, because we have to go into every single person that applies and attach what is called a CCE form. You get that after you interview, and it's a campus committee evaluation form, and it's essentially an additional page where one of the members of the faculty committee that interviews you is able to provide more information about you, your qualifications, your experience, and when done well, I've seen where that sheet just provides such a glowing review of the individual from an outside perspective that you can't really provide in your personal statement. And so the CC form does add a lot of value, but because we have to attach them all individually, that takes time. And we also want to make sure we go through everyone's application where in the past, it's like, hey, did you know that you submitted the same essay twice? Okay, yeah, we want to make sure we check all of that as well. After you submit for that national deadline, it goes to the National Screening Committee. That's that domestic review committee I mentioned. They will let you know earliest by mid-December, latest by like mid to late January if you are, thank you, but no thanks, try again next year, or if you're a semifinalist. And if you're a semifinalist, they're going to send you a very long email that essentially says, you will hear from us. We're not going to tell you when, but you'll hear from us. And for some, that you don't hear anything until you hear a final decision. For others, you may have to conduct an interview, which hopefully our interview in mid-September will help prepare you for, but with a host committee made up of academics, made up, again, of former Fulbrighters, or just people who run this opportunity. And then you'll be notified if you are a select, an alternate, or a non-select. And so those decisions are going to happen anywhere from late March to we're about like 70 to, well, about 80% through our list, and we're still waiting on a few decisions. So anywhere from like March to May, you'll find out if you're a recipient, to then start usually August, sometimes February. So you're applying a year out from when you would actually start this opportunity. So that's why, like I was saying earlier, that once you're done with your Fulbright application, move on with your life like Fulbright is not happening. And I say that facetiously, but also seriously, because if you're also applying to graduate school, if you're also applying to jobs, if you're also applying to these other things, we don't want to hinder that in any way. And if you do hear, because Brian, for example, who I mentioned back earlier in the presentation, he applied to graduate school, was accepted to Ohio State University, interviewed, earned an assistantship, and then found out he got his Fulbright. And so they're like, I mean, yeah, cool, go do that. Yeah, we can, they're like, well, in that case, they're like, we can't defer your graduation, or I'm sorry, your enrollment because you're starting a year and a half later. But they were like, reapply, like they're not gonna say no. And so every other instance, the institution is always willing to work with you and defer your enrollment. And so I'm gonna keep saying that until I prove it wrong. So a lot of opportunities are going to work with you. Now, okay, so AGFA O&M, how do we help? Obviously, if you haven't figured it out, we help you manage all of these application components to make sure this is as painless of a process as possible. We'll work with you to go over selecting the best references for your application. For those that attended yesterday, thank you. We also do essay workshops where yesterday we were talking about the personal statement. We read some sample essays and just kind of talked like general approaches to make sure that you are as authentic in your essay as you can be. And then we're here for any specific questions. We also have years of contacts to Fulbright alumni, other people involved in the process, people that can literally tell you, yes, I did the thing you're wanting to do. Here's my sample drafts. Here's some advice. Well, actually, you'll probably be hearing from us soon. Be hosting an ETA alumni panel on May 19th, I think. Yes. An ETA from Colombia, Brian will be there, and an ETA from Spain. And so we'll have somebody that did their Fulbright 8 years ago, maybe 9. And Brian, who finished his about 5 years ago, and then one that just finished it. So we're hopefully get a pretty good perspective on how Fulbright has impacted both their immediate lives and just their overall careers. This is just some contact information. Again, my name is Jesse. We also have Keith that will be working with graduate students. Bonnie, I am so sorry. I will move this so we can see your contact information, but we also have Dr. Stevenson and Dr. Filer also in O&F. And so, questions. But like I said, I'll also pull up the website if you do need to go. I understand, I won't be offended, but we'll be here for a little while.
We have one question in the chat.
Yes, let me start here and then we'll go to that.
We can start with the chat one.
Let's start with the chat.
Okay, it's just about the language evaluation. Is it a formal written test? How does that work?
Yes, so there, and we can find that sample form. You can probably find it on Fulbright's website, but we also have it. But it's essentially like make an appointment with faculty, like in the Spanish department at Florida State. You don't even need to know them. But if you reach out to them, we're happy to help you with that email. I just say, hey, I'm applying for this fellowship. It requires that I am evaluated on my speaking, my reading, and my listening. And that's how they're going to evaluate you. And so for a lot of students, they're very confident I can meet that intermediate proficiency, and so it's very low stress. For others, you may need to, refresh and study up on some materials. But I usually recommend you don't need to really, you can wait until about July, maybe even early August. I mean, reach out to someone that may be able to help you. Sometimes the languages that you need proficiency in, there's no one to evaluate you at Florida State. If that's the case, let us know. We'll do our best to help. But yes, so it is a form that they will fill out very similar to the reference form for the ETA application.
Okay. So right now I'm a sophomore, and as it's like going right now, I will most likely have a job lined up for me after I graduate. But I also want to do Fulbright. So if I do Fulbright, do you think my job would wait for me to like come to that?
It's hard to say. I think everyone's situation is different. When I was working with Brian years ago, again, for his situation, I was like, you don't need to tell them anything. You apply to grad school, they don't need to know about Fulbright because it just wasn't relevant. If this is a more personal relationship with like the employer or whomever, maybe you should talk to them and see. But
it's like I have an internship, but the job is too. It's like for international journalism. So I think it'd be beneficial to have Fulbright experience. So do you think they'd work with me on that?
I can't say for sure without knowing them. I think that's a conversation worth having. But also, if that's something that you want to immediately transition into, we could work on a Fulbright application while you're in that internship. You don't need to just be a student to apply. We work with alumni all the time. Okay. So even if you're like 2 years out of FSU, you can still, so this goes for everyone else. It's like you can apply as an alumnus through your undergraduate institution, as long as you haven't started at another university that has a fellowship office like ours. We don't want to step on anyone's toes, so you need to work with them. Otherwise, you're welcome to work with us. We have students like years out that work, like we had somebody like, over a decade out that was just like, hey, can I work with y'all? Yeah, because you get to go through our process, you get the CCE form, and it's better than just applying at large, which you can do, but.
So from personal experience though, are like companies willing to work with it or?
I have not had an instance where a Fulbright recipient, it's a case by case situation, but almost always they're willing to defer. That's mostly in the reference to graduate school programs. But it'd be hard to imagine a situation where you're selected for a Fulbright, which is a very prestigious, very recognizable award. You go do that thing and then you become less employable. And so so we have had students that have turned down Fulbrights in the past because they have had other opportunities. And so again, it's not about Fulbright. Like, we want you to go because, I mean, we work with you for months, so I'm a little biased. I want you to take the Fulbright, but it's about the opportunity that you have. And so as long as you're getting an experience or doing something that you want to do, it's going to help you in your career, develop your skills. That's what's most important. And so the other thing is, because Fulbrights due so soon, we have students that transition into other applications for other fellowships. Like Boren, for example, is one for language study. But it also comes with a hefty stipend that allows you to study a year abroad. So we've had students turn down Fulbright for like another fellowship. It's like, yeah, that's great, you should do that. So we will not be upset, is what I'm saying. So talk to your employer, talk to when it's appropriate.
Yeah.
Because like I said, you're going to apply so early, you're applying a year ahead, that life moves on while you're waiting on Fulbright.
Yes, so right now I'm a sophomore, so I'd apply next year.
So yes, at the end of your junior year is when we would start working on it. Yeah. At the earliest, we can start working on it.
So if we choose to go for a 1 year for like a 1 year master's, would we be graduating with an MA, or would we still need to complete that MA? And if so, like, what are some ways that we could like get funding to complete it?
So the expectation is that, if it's a 1 year master's program, you will earn your MA by the end of your Fulbright experience. If it's a multi-year program, sometimes it's hard to know funding options at that institution until you're accepted. And so we're going to be applying to a Fulbright likely much sooner than you're going to need to apply to that institution. Usually those are like late fall, maybe early mid-spring. So it depends. So what I'm saying is, we're going to work on your Fulbright application, but make sure you know when you need to be applying to that graduate institution and be communicating to them as a prospective student, not necessarily a prospective Fulbrighter, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, usually it's going to wait till you're accepted, and then they usually have like a international student liaison or some sort of office that will be able to communicate with you about funding options.
This is really specific, but let's say that the program that you want to apply for requires intermediate proficiency, but you've taken up to 3 semesters. I said like you need at least 2 years. But the only reason why you haven't taken the 4th one is because you can't fit it into your schedule. Is there a chance that you could take proficiency tests if it says equivalent to college level?
Yeah, you can do that. Or if you plan to take it over the next year, you can also articulate that in your application. So what are you going to do to supplement or to meet that proficiency by the time that you would go? Yeah. Any other questions in the chat? Or yes.
I'm just kind of curious, how many people are given this award each year?
Nationally, I think it's around like a little over 2,000. But that is like every country, every award type. For reference, a top producing institution is 10 or more. We're currently sitting at 9, and we have 3 decisions left. So, on the cusp. But it's so the number, like if I just said like we almost have 10, it's like that's nothing. It's like normal but in the but everyone's applying to so many different countries, so many different degrees of competition, and the quality is going to change every year. You don't know. So what you can control is applying to the country that is the best fit for you at this moment in your academic or professional career. Because, I mean, there are literally awards where it's like 2 awards and like 250 people apply. And then there's another where it's like 1 award and like 8 people apply. That's going to be 8 really competitive applicants. So again, at the end of the day, you need to apply to what's the best fit for you. And if you're genuinely torn between multiple destinations, which happens every year, we can have that conversation in a one-on-one and see, okay, well, maybe based on your specific ideas, we can find very specific ways to attach to it. There's been like one instance where the student had such solid reasons for both. And then I pulled up the statistics and I'm like, go here. I'm mostly kidding. That was it kind of did happen. You know, I never recommend it otherwise, you know, it's a case by case situation, but yeah.
So are you guys able to help us determine which program would be best for us, or is that something we kind of have to come to on our own and then start?
We can help, but at the end of the day, this is your Fulbright and not mine.
Right.
So it's like, I want every year for a Fulbrighter to apply to New Zealand because I really want to go to New Zealand and just like walk the Lord of the Rings trail to Mordor, but I'm not going to tell you to do that if that's not like a good fit for you. You know, so at the end of the day, so you could have 50 applicants apply to Panama and you're going to get 50 different reasons on why they need to go to Panama. And that's what Fulbright wants to see. So you really need to make the application your own. Other questions, other thoughts? Well, I think I have 15 minutes.
Is there a resource available that lists is there a resource that lists the available opportunities for their associated countries?
So I think that would be helpful if I pull up the website. So yes,
Share that.
wait, okay. Let me sorry, my eyesight is terrible. Let's just do this again because I know where those buttons are. Now, I'm gonna say this once. Make sure that you are applying to this website, us.fulbrightonline.org. You are at the US student program. You are not faculty. You are not applying for the Fulbright fellowship or what, it doesn't matter what it's called. I don't even care, but this is the one you're applying to. They have had this same picture of this guy working with a robot for like 10 years. It's never gonna change. That's how you know you're in the right spot. So anyways, because there's always one person every year that starts working on their application and we find out it's like weeks into their application, they're applying to a faculty award and we're like, no, it's not it. Now, the easiest way, well, I don't want to say it's the easiest way to start because everyone's a little bit different. Because some people know exactly this is the country that I'm applying to. I don't care what I do there, but this is the country I'm applying to, and that's fine. Other people know this is the award type that I'm applying to, and I could go anywhere, but I know I want to do an ETA. That's fine. And so some people are a little bit more broad and it's more regional. And so regardless of where you ultimately end up, what you're going to end up doing is like you're going to have countries that are pretty straightforward, that they have ETAs and they have open study research. And they give you a very specific number, and that's it. And then you're going to have countries. Oh goodness, let's see if I can find it. Where you click on it and then you're like, oh my God, like 150 ETAs, this very specific thing, that thing, that thing, that thing, what is this? And so it gets, and that's a very country specific opportunity. Sometimes they're partnership awards with universities. Sometimes it's a very specific degree that you're able to pursue in that country. But again, it goes back to, it needs to be, okay, so why do you need to earn that degree in Taiwan and not in the United States? More often than not, what you're usually going to see is something like what Brazil has, where it's just study research, whatever you want, ETA, just follow our guidelines. Now, I usually pick Brazil for a couple of reasons. And so we'll kind of go through this together and just show you where all these items are, but wherever you ultimately apply to, you're going to keep that tab open for the next 6 months. And I'm kind of being dead serious because you constantly need to go back and reference it because, and I'll show you here where there are very specific caveats that you might just forget over the course of your application. This is open to every degree type, whether you're an undergraduate or doctoral candidate. It's 9 months. Sometimes these are going to be very vague, where it'll literally just be like, yeah, all projects are accepted, yeah, do whatever. And that's fine. So if it's very vague and you can fit yourself and your idea within it, excellent. If it's very specific, where sometimes, dependent on the country, the culture, they'll say projects in these fields are not accepted. And if you're in that field, then don't apply there. But otherwise, it's usually pretty vague. A little bit about the start date. So this is one of those February start dates. So it's about 1.5 years from the time that you apply. So that's good to know. Tell you about in-country orientation. The candidate profile, again, extremely vague to extremely specific, and it just varies on country. And so if it's vague and you can fit within it, excellent. But let's actually see. So the following attributes are very important in selection of finalists: presenting a strong, well-defined project proposal, solid working relationship with proposed affiliate, Okay, that's pretty, okay, they made it sound a little bit more high stakes, that's pretty standard. Somewhat important, oh, we don't need to get, anyways, read that description. Now, this will tell you dual citizens are not eligible. Foreign language proficiency, intermediate, placement type. So, or proposal type, so this is what I was mentioning. It can be independent study or research. It cannot be graduate degree enrollment. So you cannot earn a graduate degree in Brazil, but you can do research and you can partner with an academic institution. The reason, and like I was saying earlier, the reason that I pulled this up, and I'm sorry if this camera angle is really weird. I don't know where if I'm staring directly into it, so I apologize. But it will tell you somewhere. Aha, okay. So specific considerations. Priority will be given to applicants who locate their project outside of Sao Paulo, Salvador, or Rio. I worked with an applicant a few years, and so I bring this up because I had a student a few years ago, we were working on a poetry project in Brazil. And it essentially boiled down to, they had done a poetry project that focused on the lived experiences of Black people in the South. And then they did an idea grant in Brazil that focused on the experiences of Black Brazilians. And they had an excellent project, their poetry was phenomenal, but after their experience, they're like, I can do this better. I need more resources, I can re-engage, I know like where the museums are, I know where the cultural hubs are, and so that essentially was their application. And I mean, I'm saying this in all seriousness, what they basically told me is, so like, the Black people live in Rio. I need to be in Rio. And they told me I can't apply to Rio because I'm at a good, and so the conversation became, well, it's like, you need to prove why Rio is the best place for you. And so they used statistics, they looked at resources, they looked at local museums, and they talked about like cultural events that were going to be happening in that area, and basically like flexed on Fulbright, was like, this is my project. It would, and I think one of the sentences they used is that their project will not be of the quality or up to the standards that they have if it is not in this location. And they ultimately got it. You know, so you take these things into consideration, but if your project is inherently going to not be as good, you know, then that's a conversation to have with your advisor. Other countries, for example, like ETAs to Spain, will say at the very bottom of their page, your first sentence must be this. And if it is not this, which is, it needs to be, this is the location I'm applying to within Spain, this is the age of student that I want to work with, and blah, blah, blah. And if that's not your first sentence, they do not consider your application. So those are extreme cases. Most likely you're going to get a very vague page that it's just like, if you kind of want to be here, do that. That's mostly a joke, you know, but otherwise you need to know exactly what you need to do for your country. Also, resources. You can look at the embassy websites too. And I think it helps you understand what the US's mission is in these different countries. Sometimes it can be very helpful for the ETAs. Some that it can be very helpful for the academic grants, because if your project is furthering that mission or furthering that mutual understanding, maybe that's a reason why your application may be read slightly more favorably than others if you're furthering that mission. Now, we can take a very quick look at the ETAs, but I really won't bore you with that too much. For example, doctoral candidates are not eligible for Brazil. This one tells you about 30 hours per week. You're going to be in the classroom or preparing for the classroom. Candidate profile, foreign language proficiency, placement type. If you are like me and you do not want to be around children, do not apply to a country where you will be teaching children. Just know that about yourself. And so if you know you want to work with older students or university age students, do that, but know how to adapt your pedagogical ideas to accommodate that population. Some of these will be very specific like this is, others, it will literally give you the full range and even include adult education. And so if you're generally open to everything, that's fine, but we still want to tailor it as best we can. They may also tell you, so some countries actually let you state preference for placement, that's fewer and far between. Others will just tell you, if you're not okay with being placed in the boonies, then do not apply here. I'm not saying that you would, but they just want to make sure that you're aware of it. So anywhere from like capital city, regional city, rural placements, and anything in between. And so this one required. supplemental project. So you need to have something in the community, as long as it falls within their guidelines for what the project can or cannot be. Questions about that before I look at a couple other resources on the website that y'all might find? Yes.
Which countries and regions are the most competitive?
Almost always, if you're applying to the UK, and we send students there all the time, we actually currently have an alternate to one of the universities in the UK. Again, it varies by university. There are some partnership awards that will have 80 applicants for a single award, and others that will have like 10 or fewer. So it comes in waves. But they also, so Fulbright also knows that some students play the numbers game. We actually, about 5 years ago, had 2 recipients to Luxembourg. Is it the smallest country in the world, or it's like vying for it? But they had like 3 awards, and 2 of them came from Florida State. That next year, you can usually see this pattern on that statistics page. Again, I'm not telling you how to find that. Where it'll have like 1 year you have 10 applicants for 3 awards. The next year you have 45, and then the next year it dips back down, because they know students are looking at where they're statistically most likely to be selected, and not necessarily what's the best fit for them. So conversation to have with your advisor, but it varies by year. So it's really hard to predict. Because maybe 1 year the applicants to that one specific opportunity were just not as good as the year prior, but you don't know.
Yeah, but generally, is it more competitive for like English-speaking countries and Spanish-speaking countries?
I would say Western Europe is usually one of the most competitive areas. Like usually France, the United Kingdom, usually stick out. Some countries within South America are definitely more competitive than others. Mexico can be very competitive. Usually Europe. Everyone wants to go to Europe, and I'm not saying that in a negative way. If that's the best place for you, that's where you should apply. But not as many people apply to Eastern Europe. Not as many people apply to Southeast Asia. Not as many people apply to Southern Africa or like Central Africa. And so think about where's the best placement for you in your project. Other questions? Do we have anything in the chat? Okay. So you should also be aware of this alumni tab for a few reasons, because the Fulbright application process should never be like you and you alone. It's a community effort, and it's not just you and your advisor. You can click on this grantee directory. Actually, I don't want to start there. We're going to look at alumni ambassadors. So these are people all the way back to 2008, which is when I graduated high school. Look at that. Wow, that was forever ago. And so these people are going to have signed up to be contacted about. They'll tell you your description of where they went, their project. They've also added. I really like this for some of the students. They've added very specific identities that if you hold that same identity and you want to hear about their experience as a Fulbrighter, you could reach out to them. And so it is hard to not find someone that did the project that you wanted to do, or at least went to the country that you wanted to do, but it does happen. And so a few years ago, I had a student that was applying for a public health focused research opportunity in Vietnam. And she went through this page, just like no one that she could find that did a health project in Vietnam. And so what she went to was this grantee directory. And so you can find every Fulbrighter, I believe since 1946, that has done a Fulbright. Granted, it's probably a lot of dead people in here at this point. That's not that funny, but thanks for humoring me. But what I mean is, if you can search by your area of interest, if you can search by your institution, or just even the country that you're wanting to apply to, and you have decent internet stalking skills, you can find this person. Most people on their LinkedIn will list that they're a Fulbrighter. And so this student, my authentic advice without being funny was just like, look, find that person and just recognize the awkwardness. Be like, hey, I'm really sorry to reach out to you, but I saw that you did a Fulbright, and I'm trying to, and I have never encountered a Fulbright alumnus that wasn't willing to help anyone that expressed interest. And so this person responded, was like, yeah, I'm excited that you're applying. Here are my sample essays. Here are the contacts of the people I have in country still. Here are some of the hospitals you should look into to partner with, and just like literally gave her all of this information. And like I said, every student that I've worked with Fulbright that has asked for help, has never been turned away. So the Fulbright community is very active, very supportive. And so don't be afraid to apply to a country because you have no connections there. You can find it. We can help facilitate that. Those are the main resources that I'd recommend to use, but obviously this website has YouTube videos. Fulbright hosts workshop. They do alumni engagement events. And so if you stay active and involved, I've also heard there's like a Twitch channel or like, I don't know, maybe it's not that, but regardless, part of it kind of sounds like a cesspool, but because everyone kind of feeds their anxiety into one outlet, which I don't think is healthy, but it can be a good, because for example, students will be like, hey, this country is reporting, or it usually reports on this date. That's good to know, but then leave that website because you will hear nothing but stress and anxiety for the week leading up to it. But again, to be serious, is that there are so many resources out there for you to use that it's not just your advisor, it's not just your community, it's through Fulbright itself, through these alumni. That is all that I have, and we ended exactly at 1 hour.
No,
So
you're not done. I got a question for you.
Okay.
Would applying for research in Taiwan or Vietnam be as competitive as the UK?
it depends. Like I was saying, it's just so hard to tell in a given year how many people are applying to a specific award and the quality of the applications to that specific country. And so I wouldn't say it's necessarily more competitive. I would honestly just say, assume any Fulbright you're applying to is competitive. There are slight degrees of variance, but they're all going to be difficult because even though there are, like, say, 2 Fulbrights to a very specific country, they're not going to just select 2 people if they don't feel like those people are qualified to do the work. And so, I mean, you'll see some years where there are fewer Fulbright applicants than there are awards. It just sometimes happens. So at the end of the day, if you're applying to Vietnam or Southeast Asia, you should be applying there because it's the best fit for you, your project, and your goals. And I also talk to students that almost like apologetically are like, I want to apply to the UK. And it's like, no, that's what you should do. Like, you should absolutely do that because every year we, like I said, we send students to the United Kingdom, or we have students that make it far in the process, ultimately don't get it, but are still able to go, still find ways to get funding, still find ways through that university for other scholarships. And oftentimes, not just for the academic awards, or I'm sorry, the graduate degree awards, for the research awards, students who don't receive Fulbright still find ways to go and do that because of the connections they made through the process, and they get those soft or very firm offers to go and do that project. So again, Fulbright is an outlet, it's a means to get there, but it's not the only means to get there. And so practicing a Fulbright application is going to make everything else you apply to your senior year or as an alumnus much easier. I can almost say that with 100% guarantee. I have gone through the writing process myself. It sucks, but I am better at writing and articulating myself and my goals. And that's the very baseline worst case scenario. That's what we hope you're doing because it's going to serve you later in your career. Best case, you get your Fulbright. And every year we have students that apply, like Brian, for example, did not make it past the first round, was just told like, no, thank you, and reapplied the next year and got it. And so we have re-applicants every year that are selected. And so again, we are here to work with you, whether you're a student at Florida State or not. But other questions, either anyone in attendance on Zoom? Thank you all so much for joining and listening to me talk for literally an hour and 3 minutes. It was a pleasure. Thank you for letting me perform. Bonnie and Keith and I, we will be here for a few more minutes. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have. Otherwise, you are released from my clutches.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And so you should be receiving a recording if you want to keep this for the information, just later on. We also have plenty of forms and flyers we can send to your way. So if you haven't started the pre-application process, feel free to email myself or Bonnie. We'll get you the link and all that information that you need.
Yeah, if you registered for this, you'll receive the email tomorrow that has the YouTube link, and then you'll also attach that email will be our internal guidelines document, and that has the link to like the internal process. Stuff like that.
So if we are like current juniors going into our senior year and we want to do it, say the year after we graduate, or the year that we graduate? Our first deadline would be June 1st.
Yes, so if you're wanting to start this,
Like start the process now, and then the first deadline would be.
yes, it's June 1st.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Or if you know you're not wanting to do it immediately that year after, then you would apply next year. But if you know you would like to transition from undergrad into a Fulbright, you would meet that June 1st deadline.
Gotcha.
Yeah, thank you.